I thought that a good start for this part of the channel about horror, movies, video games, whatever, it would be a good idea if I started by talking about how I got into horror, why I like it, and some of my favorite movies. Obviously, I don't think everybody will agree with me. In fact, most of the time, my opinion on what is a good horror movie and what is a bad horror movie is an unpopular one. So I don't expect people to really follow me or like me after I get much into my reviews and the thoughts I have on popular horror films, because a lot of them I do not like, and for very specific reasons. That being said, from a very early age, I was into horror. And I really don't know why, but I remember being a kid and I was just drawn to it for some reason. Anything that was age appropriate for me to be consuming, whether it was like a book or a movie or a show, I was watching it. I mean, I watched the Goosebumps show when I was a kid. I watched Are You Afraid of the Dark? I read all the Goosebumps books. I had like a huge collection. I had like almost every single one of them. My parents hated buying them for me because they did not like horror. Neither of them liked horror, ever. So this was like an uphill battle. They didn't want me to see horror movies. They didn't want me to read the books. But it came to a point where they were just glad that I was reading anything. So that was the upside to it, is that as long as I was reading, they kind of caved in on if it was the horror genre or not. And this led me to read a ton of books. I remember that one of my first favorite books in the horror genre as a child was the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark books, the 3 of them. And I even have the trilogy in a hardback as of now, because I absolutely love those stories. And even as an adult, the art in that book is still creepy. And even though I have my complaints about the movie adaptation, I think the creation of the monsters and what they did with that was extremely well done, probably because it was mostly practical effects, and I will always be on the side of practical effects over CGI. So I also mentioned Goosebumps, which I was constantly reading those. And I read a lot because my parents were very anti-television, anti-video game, and they really restricted our ability to watch TV. And it was just like the only form of entertainment other than TV was going to be books, because we're talking about a time before it was the internet. We did have a computer, but we were also limited on how much we could play on the computer, like video games or anything really. So I just kind of immersed myself in books, and I became a very quick reader. For whatever reason, I can read very fast, and my parents were kind of annoyed with me because by the age of like 11, there was this whole teen young adult section in the library that was just horror books for teens and young adults. And by the time I was like 11, I had read all of them. And I'm not saying it was like a big section or I'm a super genius, because it was really like a small corner devoted just to like young adult horror. So there were maybe a few shelves. And I think it's reasonable that I read that much in a few years, because that was all we really had to do. I would read every waking hour. I would read at school. I would read at lunch. I would read during class and get in trouble. So that's basically what I did with my time. So it kind of makes sense that I went through all those books so quickly. And then I wanted to start reading adult horror, specifically Stephen King, because I knew that he wrote horror, but like anything in the adult section. And my parents were very, very against this for whatever reason. Eventually, because they realized I didn't have anything to read and I was reading the same books over and over again, and they kind of wanted me to expand my vocabulary and all of that, they did allow me to start reading adult horror novels. So I started in 6th grade with my first Stephen King novel, which was Pet Sematary, and that became one of my favorite horror novels by Stephen King, probably ever. It's not the top one, but it's at the top of the list, because if you know anything about Stephen King, he can't end stories to save his life, but that one has a really decent ending. That's one of the rare ones that has a decent ending. So that's why it became one of my favorites. And then from there, I moved on to things like It, Carrie, Cujo, Night Shift, all of that. Around the time that I was 13 years old, my parents decided that it was okay if I saw R-rated horror movies as long as they approved them first. So we went to the video store. And of course, in a video store, there's gonna be a whole section for horror. But my parents didn't like big chains or anything like Blockbuster. We went to a very local, family-owned place. It was called Flicks. I don't think they exist anymore. I don't think they've existed for years. But they had one wall. It was extremely small, and it was a horror section. And I was pretty much devoted to the idea that I was going to see every single movie possible from that section. All of them, if possible, but some of them were rated NC-17, and obviously as a 13-year-old, my parents wouldn't let me. So over the years, with my ability to actually get there, and then also my own money, I was able to see the vast majority of the movies in that section. Not all of them, but most of them. And this would include stuff like Faces of Death. That was when I was a lot older, but I did see Faces of Death. And I saw a bunch of other things like American Psycho and all the classics like Nightmare on Elm Street, like the whole series, Friday the 13th, the whole series. My favorite slasher or classic horror movie, I guess you would say, is the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. I've always loved Freddy Krueger the most. Not that I don't like Halloween or I don't like Friday the 13th, but if I'm going to choose one that I'm going to marathon, it's going to be Nightmare on Elm Street basically every single time, other than possibly the Saw movies. Now, I don't know if Saw is considered classic yet, if it's too new, but the first one came out in 2004, and I had never seen anything like that before. I don't think anyone had, which is why it became a phenomenon. And I still remember sitting in the theaters watching that ending and watching Jigsaw get up off the floor and being completely amazed. And anyone who tells you that they saw that ending coming, they're lying, because nobody saw that coming. That's exactly why it became a billion-dollar franchise, because the twist endings were so well done, as long as you managed to avoid spoilers. And I saw the first Saw in theaters 4 different times because I had never seen anything like that before, and I was just fucking amazed. Another movie, which came out in 2002, was the remake of The Ring, which is, well, Ringu in Japan. And at the time, I didn't know that it was a remake. That was like the start of the American remaking Japanese movies thing. And I saw that. I thought that was one of the scariest movies I'd ever seen. And thankfully, around that time, the internet was becoming more and more prevalent and people were using it more and more. So I joined forums and I found out that it was a remake, and I saw the original, which I absolutely loved. I found out that it was based on a book. So it was so hard at the time to track down an English translation of this book. I mean, it's widely available now, but back in 2002, when I found out that it was a book, it was not heavily available in the US, and places like Amazon didn't exist. So I remember going to like 3 different Barnes and Nobles just to find a copy that had been translated into English. But once I read that book, it became one of my favorite books. I went on to read the rest of the trilogy, which is Spiral and Loop. I'm not caught up on the other books because for whatever reason, I lost touch and I was unaware that there were other books, but I do have Dark Water by Koji Suzuki, which is a collection of short stories, and it's very good. So I will read anything that he writes. I just need to get around to it and I need to buy the books. Over the years, obviously, I have immersed myself in a lot of horror. This includes video games, like I mentioned at the start. My experience with horror video games was completely accidental because I, at first, wasn't into it for some reason. But I remember that we got a PlayStation from my aunt because she was upgrading her PlayStation to a PlayStation 2. And she thought my dad was completely lame for not letting us have video games or play them. So she gave us her PlayStation and then all her PlayStation 1 games, like every single one of them. I would play first-person shooter games on the computer a lot. I played Doom, I played Doom 2, I played Wolfenstein, but for whatever reason, I didn't consider horror games for the PlayStation. Until one day, my sister, she's like, I need help with this video game and I think you can do it. I can't do it myself. I was like, okay, I'll help you. And it turns out what she was talking about was Resident Evil 2. And it's the first part, the opening part, where you have to run past the zombies and get into the gun shop and all of that. And she couldn't get past the zombies because they kept attacking her. But I was able to do it. And I really liked it and I kept playing it. And she didn't think that she had the skills to play the game correctly because she didn't think she had the eye-hand coordination. So she would sit there and watch me play, and she would help me with some of the puzzles because, you know, like, there was no internet back then, so you couldn't just look up something if you got stuck. So she kind of was my saving grace on that. Because of this, me and her ended up playing a lot of horror games together. Like, she would find some really good horror games and then she would watch me play them, and I got really good at playing them, and she got really good at figuring out puzzles. So I got really, really addicted to the Resident Evil franchise. I was speed running these games without saving. I played every single one that I could get my hands on. I think if I had to name a favorite, it would be Code Veronica. Even though I like all of them except for the sixth one, Code Veronica was probably my absolute favorite because I like Claire. I even have a cosplay costume for Claire, and I hope to wear it to a convention sometime soon. In any case, this led to a lot of other horror games, which I played. But I think my favorite single standalone horror game would be Evil Within. I know that it has a sequel. I don't hate the sequel. I actually think it gets more hate than it deserves. It's not as good as the first, but it's not as shitty as people act like it is. But the first Evil Within, I've played that one so much, I could probably play it blindfolded. I mean, I can beat the whole thing in one setting, and I can do it within a few hours because of how much I played it and how much I love that game. I also love games like Outlast and Outlast 2 and Outlast The Trials. I think that's what it's called. I only just got that one, but I still like it. I liked Madison, which I recently just got. That one held my attention like crazy. It was very well done. I really, really like Dead by Daylight. I play it all the time, at least once a day. I used to play it more back in the day. We're talking like 2019, but the player base got really, really toxic, and now it's just like a chore some days. It heavily depends on what time you play and when you log on and just like the luck of the draw. The problem with that one is I also play solo queue because I don't know anyone else who plays Dead by Daylight, so I'm usually in there alone, which makes it way worse and way harder. I play a split between Killer and Survivor. Mostly when I'm playing Survivor, I'm playing either Michaela or Sable, but I do jump around between survivors because I like a lot of them. I play Jane, I play Fang, I play Kate, I play Elodie, I play Meg, I play Claudette, and Vittorio. I haven't played him for a while, but I do like him. And then when I play Killer, it's 90% of the time it's Spirit, which I know sounds weird because I just went on that whole thing about how I really like The Ring and Ringu and Sadako. I also play her, but I was playing Spirit long before they even released Sadako for the game, so I just got really good at playing Spirit. I'm definitely not one of the top tier players, but I'm better than a lot of people using Spirit, so she became my favorite pretty quickly. As of now, this is a pretty long video, and I don't want to make it much longer because I know people don't like long videos, or that's what I've been told about the algorithm or whatever the hell. But I briefly wanted to touch upon horror today, as in the state of it today, especially in movies. Because games in the horror genre, I don't have many complaints about them. I think most of them have been handled very well, and the ones that don't interest me, I just don't play, so I don't really care. As for movies, because I'm an aspiring filmmaker and screenwriter, and I have written horror screenplays, like feature-length screenplays. I've even been lucky enough to present to a producer and go through all of that. Unfortunately, that didn't go anywhere, but I still got that far, so it's at least encouraging. In any case, because I like horror movies so much, I watch almost all of them. Even ones that I think are going to be bad, which is most of them. But I do this because I want to look at current trends, I want to look at what is popular, and I want to be able to write better horror, but also kind of adapt to what is trendy and what people like, which might make some of my screenplays more marketable. I know it's a long shot, but It's better to know what your competition is and what's going on out there than to completely ignore it. Which means that I end up seeing a lot of crappy movies. One of the problems with this is I think a lot of horror movies are bad. In fact, I think a lot of them are irredeemably bad. Like, they should have never been made. I don't know why people are going to see them, and I don't know why they're making so much money or people say they're good. And sometimes just mentioning that I don't like certain popular horror movies gets me so attacked that it's hilarious. Because when I say I don't like a horror movie, whatever movie it is, I am not saying other people can't enjoy it. I'm not saying I don't understand why people find it scary. Horror is subjective, so what scares me may not scare anybody else, and I'm aware of that. But because how the internet is, when I say something like, I really, really hate the movie Midsommar and I don't think it's good, people attack the shit out of me, and it's ridiculous. If people want to like that movie, they can like it, but they're never going to change my mind on it, especially not if they're going to send me death threats or insult me. My whole thing is that if I think a movie's going to be terrible, I do not go pay and see it in the theaters. I will wait till it's streaming, I'll wait till it's very cheap, I'll wait for other options because I don't want to give that specific film or production money. I know that I'm just one person and it probably won't make that big of a difference, but I stand on my principles here where I'm not going to pay for something that I think is a subpar product, and usually you can tell from trailers these days. The only time that I made a mistake in the past year was not seeing Smile 2 in theaters and not seeing The Substance in theaters. I didn't like the first Smile, so I didn't think the sequel was going to be any good, but I was wrong because I think the sequel is better than the first one. And The Substance, I kept hearing hype about it, but it didn't look like it was like a horror movie, and I didn't know what it was. And then when I finally bothered to look it up and see like a summary of the movie, I thought, oh, that actually sounds kind of cool, but then it wasn't in theaters anymore. So I wish I would have seen it in theaters, but I didn't. Coming up on this channel, now that you know a bit of my background, and there won't be a longer video like this again, at least I hope not, I will be reviewing horror movies. Things that I liked from my childhood and teenage years, current movies, movies that people have never really heard of, like indie movies. And I'm not trying to be a hipster or anything. I just know that I've seen quite a few like found footage indie movies that people don't seem to know about, which baffles me because they're so good you think they get more publicity. But if you really like horror and you're really into this whole genre and indie horror, because that's probably my favorite, then you'll probably enjoy this channel and enjoy my reviews. However, I may say something that you don't like, or I may not like a movie that you think is great, which is fine, because I think you're allowed to have that opinion, but keep in mind that I'm not going to pretend that I like stuff that I don't like, and I'm going to be completely honest about everything. Knowing all of that, I would love to hear your suggestions of what movies you would like me to review. I think that the best way to start is to start with what people are curious about and what people want to know my opinions on. So if you have a suggestion for a horror movie that you want me to review, then please leave it down in the comments below. If you happen to make it this far in the video, then you probably should subscribe because it seems like you're entertained enough that you watch this long. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up because that would help. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you around in the future.